So now we have Emma Whyte from the Information Lab. Emma will be talking about why fonts are important and using fonts across different devices such as desktop, server, and public. So without further ado, let's listen to Emma.
Hi everyone, thanks Emily. So I'm just going to say hello and thank you to everyone who's helped organise this. So thanks to Emily and thanks to Jen and everyone who's been involved in that, and thank you for letting me talk. I'm going to jump straight into my screen share. So let me just bring up my entire screen and then jump out to PowerPoint. Can someone let me know if they can see this?
Well, I can.
Excellent. Thanks, Emily. Okay, so my talk for the Fringe Festival is all about fonts. So I'm going to cover, like Emily said, what fonts that Tableau can use. So working across desktop to server to public to devices like iPads. I'm also going to cover font choice, how you can mix fonts, font sizing, font color and emphasis, and how to make font usage accessible. So if you're designing dashboards to be accessible to users, then what fonts can you use? First of all, just a little bit more about me. I've been a Tableau user for around 4 years, since version 6. I started out as a Tableau customer and was kind of stuck in that reporting cycle of, okay, I have new data, I chuck it into Excel, and then I go ahead and update loads of charts and then copy it into Word, a Word document of about 90 pages, and deliver that out and hope someone reads it. So I discovered Tableau and kind of never looked back. I've been a Tableau consultant with the Information Lab for nearly 2 years now. I was interviewed by Zen Master Craig Bloodworth, so no pressure there. Outside of Tableau, I love to travel. Obviously, get to travel quite a lot with Tableau anyway, but I love to go on holiday. I like running, cycling, hiking, basically anything that gets me outdoors, because I do sit behind a desk for most of the day. I'm also a Tableau social media ambassador, so in my spare time I do probably spend too much time on Twitter. I also like to use Tableau with my own data and create sort of lots of personal visualizations. So I am quite active on Twitter, so if you want to follow me, you can at Emma Whyte. So moving on to the talk. What is my talk about? It's about fonts. We're going to cover why is font choice important, what fonts we can actually use with Tableau, so what fonts work with Tableau Desktop, with Tableau Server, with Tableau Public, and what fonts work across different devices. So if I'm viewing something on a PC versus a Mac versus an iPad. We'll also have a look at how to pick a font size and how to scale that. So how much bigger should a header be than your body font? What size should your notation font be? We'll cover which fonts work well together and which don't, and we'll look at the different font families for that as well. How to create emphasis with text. So in your titles and your dashboard, you might want to make something stand out a little bit more, make the figures stand out a little bit more from other figures in the charts. And at the end, I'll talk about font accessibility for people with visual impairments or dyslexia and things like that. I'm going to welcome questions at any point during the talk as well. So if you do have questions, there is a Q&A feature in Google Hangouts. So type in there, and I think Emily is just going to let me know when I've got questions. So feel free to do that. So why are fonts important? Well, first of all, let's have a look at the Google logo. Now, fonts can help us do a number of things when we create visualizations. We can use them in our dashboard titles, our chart titles, on our actual charts themselves to display numbers and things like that. But what fonts also do is they help us to portray an image without saying anything at all. So Google's logo is a great example. There's no pictures in Google's logo, it's all text. And this is how Google's font has changed over time, and they use their font to portray what their company is about, and it's changed very recently as well. Some of the colours have changed, so some of the yellows have gone to orange and back to yellow again, and some of the greens have gone to blue and things like that, but it's all about the text. So text says a lot about your company, it says a lot about what your dashboard means. If we have a look at Gatwick Airport in London, if we have a look at their logo, they've changed that fairly recently as well. So it kind of started out with very formal fonts. It's got a serif font mixed with a sans serif. We'll talk about those two families in a minute. You know, the colours are very bland and it looks very corporate and a bit boring. So when Gatwick was taken over, they completely rebranded and their logo changed with it. And their idea was to get something a bit more personal. So gone went the black and grey colours. We've now got a nice teal colour. The top font is a sans serif font, so it looks less formal. The spacing's really clear. And underneath, the word Gatwick is in a serif font. It's handwritten. It makes it a little bit more personal. So it gives a little bit more of a flavour of what they were trying to market London Gatwick Airport as. Fonts also portray whether something's official or not. So this is just a bit of a jokey image, but it says quite a lot. It says everything looks official with tiny leaves around it. False, it only works if you use a good serif font, and obviously you would never use Comic Sans for something that's quite formal. And something that's also really interesting is choosing good typography can make reading easier. So there's been some studies done, and if you have bad typography, you're going to frown when you read it. So whether that's on a screen or in a book, if you can't see something clearly, then you tend to squint at the screen a little bit, so you frown when you read. And if you frown when you read, it actually affects your mood, it affects your emotions. So it puts us in a bad mood if we have to frown to read things. So that's another reason why you should really think about what fonts you place on your dashboard and whether they're readable across all the different devices that someone could use when they're looking at your dashboard. So what fonts does Tableau use? This all kind of depends on where you're authoring and what you're looking at your dashboards with. So if I make something on my desktop with Tableau Desktop, it's going to be able to use any fonts that are installed on my machine. So if I've got this really cool font that I want to use, then I could do that. However, when I come to share my work, this is where we start getting limitations to what fonts we can use. If I was to publish that dashboard with a really cool font on that isn't a standard font to my Tableau server, it's not going to be able to render it, and that's because Tableau server doesn't have that font installed on it. It runs on a Windows OS, so it's basically using whatever server OS is running. And then we also get further limitations when those dashboards get pushed out to an iPad or a laptop, whether it be a Mac or a Windows platform. So you're basically then limited to the fonts that are installed on that device. So I'm just going to flip out to Tableau and bring this visualization up. So I've written, this is a list of all the fonts that Tableau Public supports. So we have the usuals in there. So we have Arial, we have Comic Sans for good and bad reasons. We have Courier New, Georgia, Lucinda Sans, Tahoma, Times New Roman, Verdana, Trebuchet. So if you're viewing on a PC, a Windows platform in either Chrome or Firefox or Internet Explorer, you'll be able to see all of these fonts. However, if you then flip out to an iOS, specifically with an iPad or an iPhone, then there's going to be some fonts that you can't see. I was really surprised that Arial Black is on that list. You can't process that font. Lucinda Sans is on there. Tahoma's on there as well. I believe Tahoma was created for Windows, so there must be some licensing issues as to why we can't use that on an iPad. So these are just things to bear in mind when you're making your dashboards. If you've picked Tahoma, for example, and someone goes to use that in iOS, it's going to default either to Helvetica New if it's on iOS 8 or under, or iOS 9 uses the new San Francisco font, which again has caused a little bit of controversy. So yeah, just be careful about what fonts you pick. If I flip back to my PowerPoint, and just go through. Okay, so font families. So you probably saw in my Tableau dashboard that I had the different font families. And we have two major families, and then they have subfamilies within that, but we'll just discuss the main two. So the first one is a serif font. So serif fonts are like Times New Roman. They have the little decorative lines or the feet on different letters. So on the S in this example, has little feet on it, so does the RIF. And that just is basically for decoration. A sans serif is the opposite. It's without the serif. It's without any of the decorative lines. A common one is Helvetica Calibri, a Microsoft font as well, is a sans serif. And serifs are traditionally used for more traditional or formal text, whereas a sans serif could be considered more modern or cleaner to read, easier to read. So how do we mix fonts on the same dashboard? And this is where knowing the difference between whether a font is a serif or a sans serif is important. So the first example, it says this title is in Calibri. My body text is a different font, isn't it? Well, actually it is. So the title is Calibri, but the text underneath is Arial. And what's really important is that the human eye can tell subtle differences in fonts. So if the difference is too subtle, I might end up staring at it for ages trying to figure out if it is actually a different font or if it isn't. So I'm probably not paying attention to what's on the dashboard. I'm not paying attention to the charts. I'm trying to figure out, has this person made a mistake? Have they accidentally chosen the wrong font? Is it actually a different font or is it the same thing? So my brain's shifting attention away to that. The bottom example is a really good example of what you should do to mix your fonts. So the title is a serif font, that's Times New Roman. And because it's so different to the body text underneath, which is Calibri, you're not sitting there trying to figure out if it's actually different or not. So maybe you're actually looking at the information on the dashboard instead. So maybe rather than sitting there trying to figure out if it is a different font, your brain clearly knows that it is, so it can focus on the actual information that you're trying to give instead. And I don't know if anyone's seen this before, but this is quite a famous framework. It's Juice's font framework. So we're going to talk about how to size different types of text, so body text, header text, notes, and how to create emphasis as well. So body text, according to this framework, should always be between 10 and 16 points. And what's really interesting is that Tableau's default is 8. So I actually tend to make my font 2 points bigger whenever I create dashboards. Body text can be either sans serif or serif. Popular choices include Arial, Tahoma, Verdana for sans serif, and serif, Georgia or Times New Roman. It shouldn't be bold, it shouldn't be italic, and it should be well spaced. Headers should always be distinctively bigger than the body text, and it suggests 150 to 200%. However, on a dashboard, you're probably limited to the amount of space you want to devote to titles or headers, so you might reduce that percentage a little bit. The font choice should either be the same as the body text or contrast to a serif or a sans serif, as we've already discussed. It could be bold or italic. Bold's always good because it draws attention. Italic I'm not too keen on because I think it makes it harder to read sometimes. Notes, so additional things that you want to put on your dashboard, maybe just little notations of about the figures used in the data or something like that, should always be slightly smaller than the body text, but should be the same font type. Again, it shouldn't be bold or italic. It should just literally use the lower size to denote that it's notation. And it's also important to discuss how to draw emphasis to key points. So you might want to draw out specific numbers, or you might want to highlight how people can interact with the visualizations through text as well. So the text should be the same as font as the body, same size, but you could choose to use a bold font or use a high impact color instead. So if I again just want to pop out to Tableau, this is quite often how I would choose headers and emphasize my text on the dashboard. So first one is Times New Roman. So headers should be 100% of body text. And underneath the body text is Arial. So again, I'm contrasting a serif and a sans serif. And you can add emphasis by using bold or try some color. So I've used a completely different and contrasting color. The text underneath used for notations is 8 point, and the body text I've put in is 10. Underneath, I've kind of flipped things around. So I've got a sans serif as the header and a serif as the body. Headers can be the same font, or you can try and mix them. Again, I've put some bold for emphasis in there. But what's interesting in this time is I haven't made my header bold. I've just used the fact that it's a different font to make, and the fact that it's a bigger size to make it a header. I'll just have to go through the beginning of these again. So what about accessibility? So serif fonts are great. So Times New Roman is a really great font, but it can obscure the shapes of letters. They can look a bit closer together, so it makes the text a lot harder to read, especially for people with dyslexia to understand, because the extra embellishments can add confusion. So preferably use a sans serif font if you want to think about accessibility. Verdana is traditionally used for accessibility. It has a really clean design, the characters can't be confused that easily either. So in this example, I've compared Arial with Verdana and Tahoma, and I've written the same word in all three different fonts. And what's really interesting is that Arial doesn't have the little inflections on the capital I. So when placed next to the lowercase l, it looks really similar. So that can cause confusion. Verdana, in contrast, does have the feet on the capital I, so you can clearly see that the letters are different. Verdana is also spaced bigger, so the spacing between the letters is bigger. So you can see like the same word in Arial is much shorter than it is in Verdana. You know, this could cause problems. So if you're creating a dashboard and you're limited on space, then Verdana might just take up too much room. So a good compromise is Tahoma, because it still has the feet on the capital I, but the spacing between the letters is much smaller. So it'll still be easy to read because you can tell the difference between the letters, but because the space is smaller, you could save some screen size. However, Tahoma isn't supported on iOS, on iPads, so that will default to the iPad's default font, so either Helvetica Neue or San Francisco. So you'll lose some control over how your dashboard gets portrayed on an iPad or an iPhone. And the last thing to note about accessibility is contrast. So we've talked a little bit about adding colour for emphasis, but the colour of the text and the colour of the background are really important when you're designing for people who might have visual impairments or dyslexia. So the easiest font to read is yellow text on a blue background, and quite often you'll see people change their, for example, website text is usually grey or dark black on white. So quite a lot of time, if people find that hard to read, they'll inverse the colours, so you'll have a dark background and light text on top. People with dyslexia prefer a cream background with black text. It makes the letters stand out a little bit more, makes it easier to read. The letters tend not to come out in the wrong order. Obviously, you want to avoid creating bad contrast scenarios where you've got two dark colours together or two light colours together. So a dark coloured font on a dark background and a light coloured font on a light background. But that brings up some interesting questions. You know, would you feel happy making your dash backgrounds or title backgrounds blue with yellow font? You know, would you feel it would impact on your design? Do you think it might, you know, make it look a bit too harsh to other people who don't need it accessible? So it brings up some interesting discussions. So I think that kind of wraps up my talk. I've got some other questions for thought. So do you think Tableau Server Public should support more font types? Do you think that would open a can of terrible font choice worms? People just putting dashboards up with any old font? And do you have to use certain fonts in your workplace because that's what they tell you that you have to use? So like marketing will sometimes say, you know, this is our font, you have to use this. There has to be this color and this size. And do you find that they are compliant to accessibility if that's the case? And lastly, are you a Comic Sans fan? So I'll stop there and I'll open up to questions.
Thanks, Emma. That has been really good, and I'm looking forward to getting some of the materials to kind of comb through them later. We don't have any questions in the queue right now. So what is your favorite font?
So I tend to use, if I go back to Tableau, I tend to use these. I'm a big fan of Times New Roman and Arial together. If I want it as a more formal setting, or vice versa, the one at the bottom is Tahoma with Georgia, and they look quite nice as well. But again, if I'm creating for an iPad, I can't use Tahoma, so I might flip that to Verdana or something else. But you kind of end up coming up with your own like mixture of fonts that you kind of tend to use most often. And I'm also a big fan of using orange or dark orange for emphasis as well, just because it really stands out, especially if you're using like a white background.
Great. So we have a couple of questions and comments. The first one is by Robert Rouse. Corporations with strict style guides care a lot about the lack of font options.
Yeah. So obviously being a Tableau consultant, you do go into a lot of organizations, and you're kind of the first thing you ask them if you're designing dashboards for them is, you know, do you have any guidelines of what fonts I should use, what colors I can use? And yeah, they are very restrictive. They usually say, you know, this is our font, this is the only font you can use, it has to be this size and this color. But it doesn't always work on visualizations. So I guess sometimes you need to have that conversation of, well, can I try this? Can I make it a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger because it, you know, it's too big for my dashboard, it doesn't fit on, or it's too small, no one can read it. Yeah, they can be restrictive, so you do sometimes have to push back and have that conversation.
Great. Another question is, can you add the slide with the font guidelines to your Tableau public workbook or add a link to it?
Yes, I think it's already on my Tableau Public, but if it's not, I'll publish it again and give a link.
Awesome. Let's see. What about Calibri?
So it doesn't look like Calibri is. So these is a list of fonts that I found that are supported on Tableau Public. So maybe it's supported on server if it's installed on your Tableau server. I guess it'd be one to find out. So I've limited this specifically just for Tableau Public because that is the smallest list of fonts that you can use.
Okay, that's good to know. And then Aaron agreed with Jim. He likes Calibri/Calibri Lite. So
yeah, it's a nice font. It's the default for most Microsoft packages. So like this is PowerPoint and that uses Calibri. That's its default font, and it is a nice font. But I don't know if it's supported across different devices as well. I don't know if it would be supported on iOS, for example, for iPads. It might be like Tahoma, where it's a Windows font.
Okay. The next question is, do you limit the number of fonts used in a visualization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I usually stick to no more than 3, but preferably 2. So I'll have a font for titles and I'll have a font for body and notes.
Okay. The next question is, do you keep the same fonts across all dashboards?
Yes, definitely. Especially if you're going for a cohesive look and feel, they should always be the same. I guess
Great.
the only maybe if you're creating something for a hobby, for like Tableau to put on Tableau Public just for some fun, then go wild maybe. But yeah, anything else I would say no more than 2 or 3.
All right. Tiffany Spalding wrote in and said, if a corporation is completely strict about their branding standards, specifically typography, you can save the needed text as a PNG and then bring it into Tableau as an image. Tedious, but handy.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I think Paul Benoove's got a blog post on that as well. That you can, create an image of your text as a title or something, and then bring it in. The only thing I would say is if we go back to accessibility, images can easily get pixelated depending on what size they're kind of changed to. So if you put it on a dashboard and that maybe resizes depending on your screen size, then it could easily become pixelated and then hard to read. So if you're talking about accessibility, a general rule of thumb is don't put text into an image. Always have the actual text on the screen.
Okay. And then Tiffany also commented that she found it interesting that Tableau uses Gill Sans and Century Gothic for their own image, but those fonts aren't on server, aren't supported on server. And then we have another question. Have your clients ever agreed to pay to use specific fonts you recommend if that is required for server, for example?
I don't quite get that question because all of these fonts should just come with your Windows operating system or your Mac operating system. So I've never told anyone to buy particular fonts. I know there's fonts out there designed for accessibility as well, but I've never come across anyone using them.
Okay. And those are the questions that we had in the queue, questions and comments we had in the queue.
Cool, excellent.
So Emma, I really want to thank you. That was a great talk, and I think I certainly learned a lot from it, and so I'll be viewing it later just because it's super handy. I want to thank you for taking the time today to talk to all of us about the font of all knowledge.
No problem, it's my pleasure. Thank you again for organising and hosting it.
Thank you so much. We'll be back at, well, on East Coast time, we'll be back at 11:45 with Who Needs D3? Build Your Network Graph with Tableau.